Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, if my Democratic colleagues were really serious about addressing the crisis unfolding on our border, they would demand that Senator Schumer immediately take up H.R. 2 instead of this counterproductive and excessively, at best, weak bill that would, if anything, only make matters worse along the border. Sadly, they're not. And we know that by their actions today, actions that we've seen just moments ago. We're still encountering close to 180,000 illegal immigrants at our southern border each and every month. Since President Biden took office, there have been over 9.5 million illegal immigrant encounters nationwide. Those are just the ones we know about, and the actual estimates put it 12 or 13 million that may have crossed illegally. Over 350 individuals on the terrorist watch list have been stopped while trying to cross the southern border. Over 27,583 citizens of communist China have been encountered at the southwest border in the last year alone. By any metric, this administration has no interest in securing our border. In fact, quite to the contrary, the data suggests this administration wants as many illegal immigrants to enter the country as possible. My Democrat colleagues want us to pretend that Republicans are somehow responsible for creating or prolonging the crisis. Why? Well, because we were unwilling to pass a bad immigration bill masquerading as a border security bill, a bill that would have normalized thousands of illegal entries at our borders each month. I continue to believe that H.R. 2 would solve most of our most vexing problems at our southern border. It's not that you have to have new legislation to fix it, but this would fix it. It would fix it because it would cabin President Biden's authority to allow this to continue to happen. But he doesn't need legislation. He could do this all on his own. But back to the point, if the Democrats were serious here, that is what Democrats would allow us to do, is to take up and pass H.R. 2. Now, sadly, that offer was rejected moments ago, and so trying to find something that will work, I'm offering a smaller, narrower bill, a bill that doesn't contain all the same provisions, but that would help alleviate the crisis by closing some of the most gaping loopholes in the law that are allowing this thing to continue. Again, cabining the president's discretion, forcing his hand so as to make it more difficult for him to perpetuate this cycle of illegal border crossings. Now, to be clear, this isn't the entire answer. But if my Democrat colleagues can't agree to those common sense reforms found in H.R. 2, then if they can't agree to consider these reforms that are narrower than I'm offering, how honestly can we take their concern about the border crisis seriously? The Stopping Border Surges Act would address loopholes in our immigration laws, which create some of the perverse incentives for illegal immigration. It would clarify that an adult cannot bring a child into this country expecting that child to be his or her ticket to avoid detention. This bill would help eliminate the disturbing recycling of children and babies by coyotes and by international drug cartels. It would allow all unaccompanied children to be returned to their home countries, thus ending the incentive for parents to send their young children here alone. Sadly, we see what's happening to those children under the supervision of the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas. They're trafficked either into child slavery, sex slavery, as drug mules, or some combination of the above. My bill would require the Department of Health and Human Services to provide the Department of Homeland Security with biographical information about the persons to whom children are released. It would require asylum seekers to apply for and be denied asylum in at least one safe country on their route to the United States. It would combat the Biden administration's obliteration of the credible fear standard by tightening that standard back to where it should be. The correct application of this standard is pivotal to operation of our asylum system, for it to be there for those who need it and are entitled to it, while protecting it from being abused, as it has been. It's been corrupted over the last 3.5 years, And more recently, it's gotten much, much worse. In fact, the Biden administration has, you might say, destroyed it entirely. We must fix it. We have an obligation to do so. The Stopping Border Surges Act would also close loopholes and restrict asylum to aliens who present themselves at an official port of entry. We must eliminate these loopholes, not allow this administration to continue to expand them and indeed to make more of them. Congress must take back the authority to establish law. And we can start that today with the Stopping Border Surges Act. Ending the ambiguities in our current law will help mitigate the situation at the border and prevent unaccountable bureaucrats from acting with impunity as the despots in miniature that they've become to enforce their own policy preferences at their own will and whim. So I urge my colleagues to support what I'm about to do here, which is to ask that we consider this bill. Now, keep in mind, just a moment ago, I had colleagues offer up to pass by unanimous consent H.R. 2. I'm offering a narrower, more targeted fix, and I'm asking unanimous consent, not that it be passed right now, but just that we be allowed to consider it, that we bring it up, that we debate it, discuss it, and dispose of it with votes. To that end, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S.685 and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Illinois.
Recapping, we had a bipartisan bill. The Republicans in the Senate said, we've got a negotiator here. Don't bring anybody new into the table. His name is James Lankford. He's a conservative senator from the state of Oklahoma. I respect him and I like him. And he headed up there negotiating. On our side, we had Chris Murphy, senator from Connecticut, and Kirsten Sinema, a senator from Arizona, independent Democrat. The three of them worked not for weeks, but for months to put together a bipartisan bill. The bill that they put together was endorsed by the National Border Council. When I hear the stories that were said by the junior senator from Texas about the terrible things that would occur if that bill would pass, I wonder, did he consider stopping to talk to the Border Patrol agents who endorsed the bill and thought from a law enforcement perspective at the border it made sense? Well, we were ready to go. We were going to have a bipartisan bill, and it was going to be the beginning of a negotiation to do something about the border. And we need to do something about the border. And then what happened? And this is a matter of record. Everyone's seen it, all the clips on television. They went to the putative, I guess that's the word, Republican candidate for president of the United States, Donald R. Trump, and said, we have a bill, a bipartisan bill, to consider in the Senate. He said, kill it, stop the bill, don't vote for it. I'd rather have the issue. I don't want to give Joe Biden any credit for anything. Even though he endorsed this bipartisan bill, we're going to be against it, and everybody who's loyal to me needs to vote no. And guess what? Virtually all the Republican senators voted no. That was the end of the bipartisan conversation about the border. And take a look at what is being proposed by my colleague and friend, Senator Lee from Utah. This bill targets the most vulnerable people seeking safety and protection in the United States. Children traveling to the United States without a parent or guardian, families with minor children, and asylum seekers fleeing persecution. This bill would strip away protections for unaccompanied children. It would deport many of these kids back into the hands of smugglers who exploit them, keep others in detention up to 1 month. You know what detention at our border is for a child? It's a cage. I've seen them. That's exactly what would happen. They'd sit in these cages for a month, keep them separated from adults who could care for them. And this bill would require families to be detained. Detained is a nice word for incarcerated. A family failed policy that has disastrous effects on kids and doesn't make the border more secure. This bill would impose multiple new restrictions on asylum, undermining our longstanding bipartisan commitment to refugees seeking safety. The Biden administration is doing what it can do now to secure the border under our outdated immigration laws. The Biden administration endorsed the bipartisan bill, which these Republican senators all voted against. The administration has dramatically increased deportations of those who are not eligible, made tough changes to our asylum system, and improved access to lawful pathways to deter illegal immigration. But ultimately, you know whose responsibility it is to write this bill? Congress. And you know what the best starting point is? The bipartisan Lankford bill that came to the floor of the Senate. That's what we're going to offer on the floor. If you want to negotiate from there, if you want to offer amendments to that, be my guest. That's what the Senate's all about. But the notion by the senator from Utah that this ought to be a starting point, I think, is a bad idea. Recently, a bipartisan group of senators in the White House negotiated a good starting point. It was written by their negotiator. I respect him. I think all members of the Senate should. And yet, when it came to a vote, the vast majority of Republicans wouldn't support it. I just want to close by saying this. This is an issue I've worked with in my entire career in the Senate. I introduced the DREAM Act over 20 years ago. I really believe this is a challenge which we can only solve on a bipartisan basis. I think that Lankford bill is a good starting point. Let's come together and work together on a bipartisan starting point. Ignore Donald Trump, who says he doesn't want this to move forward, and let's do something the American people really want. So to aspire to that goal, I object to this approach to it.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Utah.
this is unfortunate. Keep in mind what just happened here. I asked not that we pass this bill, but that we move to its consideration, that we be allowed to debate it, discuss it, and ultimately dispose of it through votes after having an opportunity to review its merits and to consider amendments. And that, too, drew an objection. Even though this would allow the body to work its will through amendments, and we could get to a point where perhaps we could agree on something. Instead, we see absolute fealty pledged to this bill, what's being referred to as the bipartisan bill. Now, with all due respect to those who negotiated it, keep in mind, the senators in the room were 2 members of the Democratic caucus and 1 Republican. And then you add to that the White House, a significant player, even if you don't weight the White House as more than just 1 senator equivalent. Putting it generously, this is a 3-to-1 negotiation. Yes, this negotiation went on for many months. During most of that time, most of us were unaware of what was being discussed. As soon as the details started to leak out, and as soon as we started to become aware of them, many of us started publicly and privately expressing our concerns, first in private, then in public. And look, separate and apart from what the 45th President of the United States had to say about it, many, I would say most of us, in the Senate Republican Conference had already formed our opinions and decided to oppose the bill based on its own terms, long before the 45th President of the United States weighed in on it. Long before Donald Trump said a word about this, we were concerned. We always would have been concerned, even had he not weighed in, based on the merits of the bill. Look, the bill itself didn't do what it was supposed to do. And he kept referring to one of my colleagues as the designated authorized representative. Well, when you're authorized and designated as a representative of 1 or more individuals, in this case 49 individuals, that still presupposes that you're negotiating something consistent with their expressed desires and subject to their approval. When at last we became aware of the details of it, we decided this was not nearly what we talked about, not what we ordered, and so we rejected it. Again, this was underway long before President Trump ever said a word about it. So this isn't accurate to describe this bipartisan bill, which, by the way, at the end of the day, received only 4 out of 49 Senate Republicans supporting it on the Senate floor. I believe it would probably receive less than that even today. It's minimally bipartisan at best. Now, as to the suggestion that my bill, the Stopping Border Surges Act, and bare consideration of it, not just that it be passed into law, but that we allowed to even consider it, he says that it somehow targets vulnerable people, including children, for inhumane treatment. Yeah, you know what's inhumane? What's inhumane is perpetuating a system that incentivizes the kidnapping, the renting, the borrowing, the leasing, the recycling of children for the purpose of creating a ruse by which adults can avoid detection, sometimes sending the same kids back through the system over and over and over again as if they were poker chips or something like that. Look, children are not props. Children certainly are not there as currency to facilitate illegal immigration. Are there human rights violations? Yes, constantly, incessantly, directly as a result of this. Mr. President, somewhere between, 35% at the low end and 65% at the high end of the women and girls that are trafficked into this country by the drug cartels, which are making tens of billions of dollars a year under the Biden administration's deliberately lax policies, are subjected to rape, to sexual assault, in many cases to sex slavery. In many instances, people can't afford the many thousands of dollars they have to pay to the cartels in order to be trafficked. So what do? Well, they work it off. How do they work it off? They do what they can, what they're told to do. And in many circumstances, we know exactly what that means. So don't talk to me about this being an inhumane bill. This is a bill that would stop the inhumanity. This is a bill that would tighten the restrictions so that this doesn't happen anymore, so that kids aren't recycled, so that they're not kidnapped, sold, borrowed, rented, and recycled as props to facilitate illegal immigration. Anyone who suggests that this is humane isn't looking at the reality of the circumstances and at the lives lost, even before you get to the Americans whose lives have been ended or have ended in tragedy or met with tragedy unnecessarily by people who should never have been in this country to begin with, and then carry out crimes, some too heinous to name, to describe on the Senate floor. Even before you get to those Americans who have met tragically with fate in those ways, just look at the inhumane treatment received by those who are being trafficked. The humane thing to do here, Mr. President, is not to perpetuate this cycle. There is nothing humane about allowing human beings to be trafficked on this scale, enriching international drug cartels whose object is lucre and whose means inevitably involve violence. Shame on all of us if we don't do this. Shame on the Senate not being willing. Shame on the Senate Democrats not being willing today even to consider a bill that would bring that to an end. Thank you, Mr. President.